Councilmember Coughlin, I'd like to recognize you.
All right, thank you, Council Vice President. So first off, I just want to give a huge thanks to you, Mr. Jackson and Ms. Ward, for really an excellent presentation. I think hearing from everybody, it was extremely clear and informative. And just a big thank you to everyone else who has worked hard on this code, including the mayor. And thanks so much to the Planning Commission for having multiple meetings and a lot of work on this and their recommendation. And finally, it was just great to see so many people writing in and speaking up on this. I think it might be a record in at least the time I've been on. So thank you so much to everybody. I have Mr. Jackson, just a few questions. I just kind of want to address some of the concerns that we got from some of the folks who were hesitant about this. Specifically for parking, can you remind me if I got it right, the cottage housing requires 1.5 parking spaces per unit. And then can you say the duplex and triplex one more time, as you remember?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cottage housing was 1.5 parking spaces per unit. Duplexes were 2 parking spaces per unit. And a townhome or a triplex multifamily, that is 1.5 per unit if there are 1 or less bedrooms. And if there are 2 bedrooms, it's 1.75 parking spaces per unit. And a multi-unit residential of 3 or more bedrooms requires 2 per unit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I know this is always tricky. Parking minimums are a hot topic of discussion. And in my opinion, it's always finding that middle ground. You require too many parking spaces and nothing gets built, too few. And as folks are worried, the streets get crowded. But to me, those seem like reasonable numbers. For concerns about junk cars on property, if I remember right, the Bremerton code currently prohibits like abandoned vehicles on property, and we have a code enforcement program in place for that. Is that right?
That's correct. And I can put the Bremerton 1 number in the chat for anyone who has code enforcement issues.
Perfect. And that's also not just junk cars, but also different aspects of the houses, say like in really severe disrepair.
It depends on the level of repair, but we'd be happy to engage with members on the public on individual cases.
Perfect. Okay. And nothing in this code is increasing the height limit or changing the underlying height limit for any zones, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then for the green space concerns, which I really appreciate. I mean, I know we have some amazing parks in the city, but there's other green spaces as well. This is a really broad question, but in all of our planning documents and zoning, there are some provisions in different places to create a certain amount of green space in certain zones. Is that roughly right?
For residential cluster developments, they require open space and multifamily projects in most zones require open space.
Okay, fantastic. And then if folks really wanted to kind of weigh in on changing that, we have the comprehensive plan update coming in next year with a lot of public input. And so would that be a good place for them to kind of speak up if they want to, make sure we preserve green space and have more of it?
Absolutely. And I can put how to comment for the comprehensive plan in the chat also.
Oh, perfect. And then for some of the transportation concerns, especially public transit, that comprehensive plan update will also include, have transportation as a big component, right?
We'll be coordinating with Kitsap Transit with our comprehensive plan update and forwarding any comments we get on transit to our transportation professionals with the city of Bremerton and Kitsap Transit.
Perfect. And then last question was, I think it was the first public comment we got before the answer. So for a downtown 5,000 square foot lot, if this code is adopted, will that allow a duplex be added, or is there still something in the future to look at for that?
And I had asked IT to add to the chat previously that if anyone has development questions on how to develop their lot, if you need a contractor or a consultant, I provided a link to the Kitsap Building Association. We're not allowed to recommend any individual contractor or service. And if anyone has questions about their individual lot in the city of Bremerton, please contact Kate Millward for any zoning information. I can't give you a specific answer because I don't know exactly which zone in the downtown sub-area plan or if they're in the downtown sub-area plan. But we would love to work with individual property owners on what's permitted on individual lots.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. I'll just wrap up with my thoughts on this, which is, and I forgot one last thank, which was to the mayor and DCD for sending out the postcards. It obviously worked for bringing in some folks, and to council member Younger for suggesting that. So looking back in grad school, I realized I lived in cottage housing. I didn't know the name for it at the time, but it was a small unit I shared with a roommate, and I was grateful that was there because it was probably the only place I could have afforded at that time. And I think I've definitely seen the need for more housing, especially this missing middle housing. I think the more units we can get, especially affordable units, from the data I've seen, that does decrease prices. I really do value the concerns about growth and kind of losing community, you know, especially like the Manette neighborhood in my district is a really special, unique and vibrant place. But I do keep in the back of my head that as a city, I don't think we can choose not to grow, not just because we always have people moving here and being born here, but, you know, literally the city has certain goals we need to meet to accommodate growth. And so I always go back to, we have to grow somehow, and there's a couple options. I mean, some of them are, you could take an area like Manette and plop down a bunch of large apartment buildings and high rises, and I don't think anyone would want that. As other people said, you could just keep expanding and take all that green space out with a bunch of single family homes. But this option of these missing middle housing, affordable units of increasing density without changing the character of the neighborhood really seems to me an ideal solution, especially for areas like Manette. And I'll wrap up with just saying I appreciate all the other concerns that this isn't going to solve skyrocketing rents and housing prices overnight. It's another tool in the toolbox, but I think it does make a difference. So I'm happy to stop talking and listen to my fellow council members' thoughts on it. But I so far think this is a great tool. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilmember Coughlin. So for protocol, I'm going to ask, am I supposed to call on Councilmember Dennehy because he seconded it? Okay, I'm going to go. I see you were next, Councilmember Mockler, but I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Councilmember Dennehy and then to you.
I'll be brief, Councilperson Mockler. Thank you so much to Mr. Jackson, to Mayor Wheeler, to Director Spencer for all the work on this. I think anything that we can do as a city government to increase density and use of vacant land in Bremerton is really the only thing that's going to lower housing prices. You know, I bought with my husband in 2017, which was only 5 years ago, and our house has doubled in price to the point where if we were buying at our salaries at 32 again, we would not be able to afford the house that we're in at this point. So I really want to do everything that I can to help folks stay in this community and also move to this community, encouraging artists, encouraging people working in the service industry, all of those people that make it a very vibrant community. I do not want to see Bremerton be turned into a Bellevue. It's quite sterile and it loses a lot of characters. I commend the administration for thinking outside of the box with this one. And I hope to see more proposals that increase density and housing stock, which will lower rents and lower housing prices. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Dennehy. Next up, we have Councilmember Mockler.
Thanks, Vice President Chamberlain. So this has been a really interesting hearing, and I join with others in commending the mayor and the administration in putting together so many opportunities for public comment, and especially for the flyer, which was great. I even got a call from a constituent today saying, I didn't get one of these. Apparently the person who owns his property lives out of town, but it's all over Instagram and, you know, various other things. So this was a very effective method, and I commend you all. Thank you. There have been several themes that I've noted on this, and one is the, I think one member of the public called it the degradation of green space. And in my opinion, as you all know, because I've said so many times, that preservation of existing, especially existing large native trees, is not only compatible with dense housing, but actually adds value to it, as has been shown in several studies, one of which at least I sent to all of you. It actually adds value to the property to preserve the existing trees on space. Sadly, our current landscaping standards, in my opinion, sadly, chapter 20.50, the intent is to preserve the large native trees, and that's stated right at the beginning. But the actual development standards call for just a reference to, I think, the horticulturalists or arborists list. Am I correct on that, Mr. Jackson?
That, yeah, the retention of trees is encouraged, but not mandatory.
Yeah. It and the preservation of trees is specifically referred to an arboriculturalist, which is a new word for me. I'll just go with arborist, which is a word I know and know how to use, who is hired by the person developing the property. And my fear here is, because I worked for so many years with people who assessed hazard trees, and many of them, one gentleman told me that all trees are hazard trees. It is very easy to find people like that. And it's a very minor flaw in a beautifully intentioned chapter of our city code. And the administration is bound by this code. So I would call for a change to that code that would permit both this dense housing and the preservation, not of every single tree in every single place, but it's a welcoming thing to have trees. It adds to the beauty of the community. I know this sounds outlandish, but many studies have been done even on projects in Chicago, which certainly isn't something that's going to get planned here, showing that two projects almost identical, one of which had trees, that it reduced unrest, it reduced crime, it increased social community. So I'm just making a pitch for that as perhaps another piece of the puzzle down the line. And I'll stop talking about it now. Mr. Jackson, I'm just asking if I've said anything inaccurate so far.
No, thank you.
Hey, so far so good. Okay, so one of the things that I said in study session, and I'd just like to repeat here, is that I have canvassed that cottage housing at 15th and Snyder multiple times over the years, and it really does have a very different feel. It really feels like a neighborhood. People know each other, they know their schedules, they know their kids, and having that common open space is supposed to foster community, and you know what? It does. It's a lovely addition to any neighborhood in Bremerton, in my strong opinion. Okay. Quick technical question, Mr. Jackson. It's a 60 square foot porch that's required on each one of the cottage housing units. That's correct?
Correct.
And it counts as part of the 400 square foot common open space required for each unit in the cottage housing. That's still correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it is possible that a developer could just reduce the common open space to 340 square foot for each unit. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't say that I would say that in addition to that front porch, that 340 feet are required.
Okay. So I'm just making a quiet hope that perhaps the porch would not be considered common open space, since, it kind of isn't. But I'm also going to say that I don't know what made you guys decide on that porch, but it was brilliant. A porch is a wonderful interface between public space and private space. I'm so impressed by that part of the design process. I'm just making a quiet request that perhaps it could be considered as not common space. Finally, on public transit, I sit on the Kitsap Transit Board with Mayor Wheeler. And I'm just parenthetically, Mayor, I'm very sorry you didn't reach out to me. As you know from the last meeting, I would have supported that letter entirely. But is it still accurate, Mr. Jackson, that there is a restriction on housing density and parking spaces that can be removed if Sunday public transport is available, if 7-day-a-week public transport is available? I know that used to be the case, but it might not be any longer. Mr. Jackson, you're muted.
There are Washington state provisions that if you have frequent transit service, which I don't think anywhere in the city or in Kitsap County falls under the definition of the frequency required. But if you have frequent transit service, then there are parking maximums that the state imposes. So we would have reduced parking if we met that level of transit service as mandated by the state. There is a separate traffic reduction section in the zoning code where you can substitute the parking requirements with the recommendation of a traffic engineer, though that is at the discretion of the community development, and we have not in cases permitted less than one parking space per multifamily development, and we have never reduced for single family homes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's a very complete answer, Mr. Jackson. You know, I must say I had not realized that Bremerton used to have its own buses. I find that a fascinating suggestion. I would love us to have circulating buses. We could have double-decker buses on Sundays, you know, red ones going around with bells clanging and children clamoring to jump on. But having regular public transit is for our larger than the area average disabled community would be of use. It would foster more of this dense housing. Well, it would also foster in-city tourism where people could get downtown. It would just generally be good for equity. I want to close in case it sounds as though I've been just one criticism after another. I am so pleased to be part of a council to which you have presented this sensible, compassionate solution to the lack of housing and the lack of affordable housing in our city. This is the culmination of a lot of work, and I applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mochler. Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Vice President Chamberlain. You are doing a great job tonight, by the way. Boy, a lot of moving parts in this for me. I found myself taking notes, and I don't normally do that. And then I actually went through those notes and kind of redid them. That to me signifies how important this is. To me, it's just a signal. Wow, yeah, this is important. I commend the staff. I know I've only been a part of this process, but I've been very impressed, not only with the process, but with the intent behind it. You know, I think that it's more than simply state compliance, that it comes from a place of value. you know, what our priorities are, you know, as a city and so forth. I grew up in courtyard housing. You know, my mom was a single mom. She had me in the 50s. So in Southern California, this was prevalent. So I grew up with this, and it was an incredible little neighborhood. We knew each other well. It certainly promoted connection between people and families. And in those days, you know, maybe a family had a car, maybe a family car in those days, but there was public transportation in Southern California, I think, that allowed that, you know, to happen. Getting into, I think the most exciting thing about this that hasn't really been, I know we all are aware of it, and the fact that we've included Bremerton Housing Authority as a possible partner with this, I think that is evolutionary. And I just commend staff for really moving on that and making that partnership happen. You know, the green space, I've been talking more and more as we talk about density, what we're going to really have to talk about, because I know that community development is already on it, and that is the mitigation fees, if any, with density for open space, and how that money could be designated. And, you know, one use could be parks and rec, reinvesting right into what is kind of taken away with that open space within a development. I am so supportive of this. I don't want it to be just a political point, you know, oh, we did this. I'm going to be looking for impact, you know, because so far we all know it makes sense. Come on, it just makes sense, right? And I, for one, love the romance of going back into that style of community. So I'm a big fan personally. All these boxes that we're ticking, I don't know what the data is going to look like. I don't know what real impact this is going to have, it being opened up like this. But hey, why not? Right? But I am going to be looking for what our numbers are around permits as we move possibly to open this up. And then, you know, I think this is kind of a baby step. This has been a really good starting place for discussions around the intersection between affordable housing and density. And those are conversations that are coming up for us that are probably going to be a little bit more difficult than this. Maybe not, I hope not. But I just am really proud to have been a part of this process. Somebody said they've been really proud of what tonight, the citizen involvement was incredible. Thank you so much. Bravo to, you know, Yoda on city council, former president Eric Younger, who came up with that idea to send postcards out. Let's keep doing that. Yay. And I think that's all I have. But yeah, that took me 2 rounds of notes, and I've still got stuff to process. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fry. We did have good involvement. I counted 15 comments, 14 participants, and I felt like that's why we needed a break, to just kind of step away from all that great public comment. And speaking of which, our biggest fan of public comment is up next here, Councilmember Younger. I defer to you.
Thank you. So as usual, I tend to wait until the end. I really do appreciate the public's testimony on this. And I'm glad we sent the mailers out. Thank you, Mayor, for doing that, the administration for doing that. Because a broad net was cast. I'm confident of that. Everybody that was in that zoning, for the most part, was put on notice, and they have the opportunity to participate tonight or contact one of their council members. So I do believe that the public process was initiated correctly with those mailers. So thank you for that. Listening to the testimony and listening to Mr. Jackson's presentation for the second time after the study session with all these questions, and having a week to think between that has really helped me with my thinking. There are some really good things in here. There are some things that I think are going to have negative effects that we're going to find out. And I'm struggling on which way I'm voting on this because of those perceived negative effects. Now I'm going to just kind of share what's going on in my brain. First of all, when this was first presented, I was confusing with the missing middle class with missing middle housing. And let me explain that. I firmly believe in America, the greatest way to reach the middle class is by owning your home. That historically has been the situation. I know things are changing with millennials, but then when they hit around 30, in general, they start thinking about putting down roots and buying a home. And historically, price appreciation on their homes, it's your greatest individual investment for most people. So I was confusing this with getting to people so they can buy their own house, so they can stop the rent cycle. You see where I'm getting at? That to me is super important, but it's also important to increase housing stock. So I get that. And theoretically, this would increase housing stock, but I'm not so sure in the right spaces. And I'll explain that in a second. But let me talk about the path to home ownership, if you will. If our goal, if anyone else thought this is our goal, I don't believe this hits the mark for that. And the reason is, in my opinion, we have effectively changed the zoning for certain parcels that may make it more advantageous for investors to buy those properties up. If you look at Mr. Jackson's slide, if you looked at the colored areas where he says these duplexes and townhomes are going to most likely take place, I would venture that 70% of that is in District 7. Mr. Jackson, that's the back of the envelope thing. You can correct me if you're wrong at any time, but about 70% of the available land to develop is in District 7. And for most people, if you don't recall that slide, that's on the very western portion up against our watershed in the city of Bremerton. Okay, it's my district, District 7. My preference in really backtracking, I think the horse left the barn a couple of years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago when the council allowed for 2 ADUs and a primary dwelling. And Mr. Jackson rightly pointed out that in the inner city area, not District 7, but the central core, downtown, and all those areas, Districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the development is more advantageous for investors and or homeowners to go the ADU route because you can get bigger density. So this proposed ordinance is not going to increase, in my opinion, duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes in that area. Now, if you say, oh, well, Mr. Younger, how do you know that? Well, I asked last week and the administration provided. In 2018, the council allowed for duplexes and townhomes to be placed in any area within 500 feet of a commercial district. Mr. Jackson threw that slide up, and you could see there's quite a few areas that are represented throughout the city that meet that criteria. Well, since 2018, we've had a grand total of 1 duplex being built. one. Okay, that is a fact. I'm not putting a slant on it. It is what it is. So my preference would be if there was a ownership requirement, a deed restriction. Now, if people say, well, then my property is not going to be that as valuable because I may have to move out of town. Well, then maybe you're going to have to sell it. I think it helps cement the contract by allowing these different type of housing types in single family neighborhoods, with people in single family neighborhoods knowing, hey, yeah, I got a duplex next to me, but one of them is the owner. And they're going to monitor that renter. And we're going to help build community. Same with the clusters. I think I would prefer to have homeowners in those clusters. Okay. This does not do that. So then next I turn, okay, so that's my deal on middle class housing. And maybe that's not the intent of this ordinance. Next, I turn into what is middle housing. So during the discussion, I quickly Google it, and you can all do that while I'm talking if you like. Just picked up a random site. This one's called the Congress for the New Urbanism. So I don't think this is a right-wing thing, but I didn't do any investigation. The definition, I think we didn't talk too much or enough about what is middle housing. So bear with me, I'm just going to read it line for line. Missing middle housing is a range of multi-unit or clustered housing types compatible in scale with single-family homes that help meet the growing demand for walkable urban living. These types provide diverse housing options along the spectrum of affordability, including duplexes, fourplexes, bungalow courts, to support walkable communities, locally serving retail, and public transportation options. This is why, and this is what's the tipping point, I think, as I talk out loud for me on this ordinance. We had many people from the public that are clamoring for more bus transportation. We have an ordinance before us that is going to take the duplexes and the townhouses, and they're going to put them way out in the outer skirts of District 7. District 7 out there is not a walkable community. There's not retail, and I don't see any retail coming soon. There's some car dealerships out there. There's a Red Apple Diner around Kitsap Lake, but Mr. Jackson, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I thought the goal for the city of Bremerton is to develop in commercial centers like the Charleston district, the Manette district, downtown, and then eventually Eastside Village. But instead, we want to spread the housing throughout the city. And all these people are calling in tonight and asking for better bus service. Well, if I'm Kitsap Transit, I'm going to say, I want to have the numbers to support that bus service, okay? We've got 2 members on the board. I'm sure they're saying we want more bus service. I don't doubt that. But Kitsap Transit represents all of Kitsap County, and they have to be objective, and they got to look at the numbers. Well, if this takes into hold and is actually successful, we're going to increase our growth out to District 7, and that's going to hurt possibly the desired growth in our inner core. I could be wrong, but I think that's what's going to happen. I think the intent's in the right place, but yeah, unless someone else wants to speak up, I'll reserve until I actually vote. I'll wait for Councilmember Chamberlain to speak up, and any other council members, and maybe you can change my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Younger. Mr. Jackson, I saw your hand physically up. Did you want to reply to anything? Or were you just waving? Maybe you were waving at somebody across the room. I don't.
Only that residential cluster development subdivisions are already permitted in the R10 zone, which permit townhomes. So this would already be permitted in the District 7 in these undeveloped areas. It was my only point. And as far as transit is concerned, it is an ongoing question of chicken or the egg. Does density lead to transit, or does transit lead to density? And I think increased ridership from an increased population is likely going to help transit numbers, but I would defer to Kitsap Transit on that.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Ms. Mockler, Councilmember Mockler. You're muted.
Oh, no. So one of the things that I have learned, and the mayor who's been on the board much longer than I can, certainly amplify or correct, but that Bremerton is the single largest user of public transportation in the Kitsap public transit area. It's by far, far and away. So just throwing that in there for what it's worth, information that you guys might not have.
Thank you. Councilmember Coughlin.
Sure. Thanks, Vice President. I'll keep it brief. I just wanted to say thanks to Councilmember Younger for really good comments. And I recognize we do have different geographical districts with different needs, and we're here to represent them. And sometimes, sometimes we're looking at that lens. The one thing I wanted to kind of respond to was the home ownership, which I thought was a interesting suggestion. Obviously, in the ADU code change the other year, the owner occupied requirement was removed. So I think it's interesting to look at, but I would be really hesitant to try and shoehorn it into this ordinance. I think it's something that would need to be looked at separately, and how it applies across the city into all the different units. So interesting, but I wouldn't really want to try and work it in here.
Thank you, Councilmember Coughlin. Just for housekeeping, Councilmember Mockler, did you want to speak again or after Ms. Fry, or was your hand just still up on accident?
After Councilor Fry.
Okay, Councilmember Fry.
Thank you. I think that the partnership with BHA could really be developed in a way that could include home ownership programs with whatever they redevelop or develop. How large of scale that would require, I don't know, but I think there's great potential there for something like a Bay Vista. And I'm not saying where it should be. I'm not saying it should be that big. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying BHA can administer that kind of program really well. And I have a lot of confidence in that. I think Councilmember Younger's points are really valid. And I do like the analogy of the chicken and the egg, or the egg. I like both, always a both girl. So yeah, I see a lot of growth happening, what I consider on that other side of the highway out there, down towards Tacoma too. Port Orchard, let's face it, is developing. Paulsbo is developing. At some point, major transportation issues are going to come up, and these are good conversations to have, because I think that Kitsap Transit needs to be responsive other than fast ferries. I really do. I love the fast ferry, but there are a lot of people that need to take their cars when they go over there, and Bremerton's been, for whatever reason, treated like a stepchild for far too long. And now our state officials are asking for Kitsap Transit to step up with state money, I guess, to help us with additional fast ferries. Well, I guess, thank you, but they're not holding Washington State ferries accountable for this, I don't think. So anyway, I know that's a perspective here, but it's all connected, my friends. And let's get Kitsap Transit focused on transiting folks over the land as well as by sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fry. Councilmember Mochler.
Thank you. And just to reply briefly to Councilor Fry, I bring this up often. That, you know, we need more buses, we need more drivers, we need more service. And so far, I have not gotten anywhere, but keep plugging. Yes, Councilor Younger made a number of really good points. I'd like to respond to those as best I can at this advanced hour. One was that Mr. Jackson in his presentation pointed out that the ADUs as currently written will be always more will be in general more attractive than any of these options. And as you may remember, Councilor Younger, I don't think anyone else here will, as a member of the public, I spoke up strongly in favor of owner occupancy for the ADUs. But, you know, the majority disagreed, and I wasn't on council, I was just a member of the public. But I agree that having an owner occupied building is quantitatively different. This is Mr. Jackson, have I said anything inaccurate so far? Cool. Okay. Then just moving right along, Bremerton is a what, 39%, 40% home ownership across the city, more or less right in there. And that figure's been pretty steady right along. So it appears that even the increased housing like the Sunfjord developments, which are in your district, Councilor Younger, have not, you know, they have not changed that relationship of 60% renters to whatever, 40% home ownership, more or less. So there's that to consider, that what, you know, that new construction doesn't seem to alter that. The other thing I think to consider is how can we make home ownership more affordable to the millennials who, as you say, will turn, you know, will eventually turn 30 and want to buy a house. Because right now with current interest rates and current housing prices, that is out of reach for most. Something that was feasible in the past is no longer feasible. Just look at what happened with the developers who commented on the Eastside Village sub area. All of them, to a person, stated that it wouldn't pencil out for them to create affordable rentals and affordable housing that would be sold and fail to yield profits down the line. Seems to me that it would be even more so. I think your concern is valid. I also think that change is the only constant. I do think one part of your concern is something that DCD should consider addressing, or I recommend that DCD consider addressing, which is that there's very little public transit in District 7. It's the reverse of walkable, as you pointed out. Are there plans to increase bikeability, walkability, public transportation, shuttle buses, and of course anything like that? Because I am not aware of any such plans. And I'm going to stop talking with one final comment, which is I think that the cottage and cluster housing will be most desirable in districts closer to the city's core for exactly the reasons that you're mentioning, Councilor Younger. They're going to look at the parking. They're going to look at the need to have cars for every adult in the household. And they're going to think again about purchasing or renting a small place far from far from public transportation lines. I have more to say, but obviously I can no longer articulate. Thank you, Councillor Younger.
Thank you, Councilmember Mochler. Are there any other council members that have a comment on this issue? Councilmember Dennehy, I did see your hand up. Did you want to make any other comments, or would you like to? Either way, it's all you.
So totally pointless. Thanks for recognizing that. I just, as one of 2 millennials on council, I just wanted to remind council members Mochler and Younger that millennials are now the oldest millennials are now in their early 40s. So just to check there. Yeah, I see you right there. And yeah, I was getting ready to jump in with a point of order. I'd like, especially on public comment issues, to focus on the ordinance at hand. I understand that public transportation is closely tied to this, but in the interest of time, I would just hope that people focus on the housing ordinance rather than public transportation.
Thank you, Councilmember Dennehy. Okay. I guess it's time for me to make a comment, so I want to address some of the public comments that I heard. So it sounds like one of the issues, and it sounds like there's a workaround for it, Mr. Jackson, is that some folks don't know how to develop a certain lot size. One quote that was mentioned, oh, Ms. Hoover is back. Hello, Ms. Hoover. One quote that was mentioned is that a lot of lots are 50 by 100, and so they need some technical assistance. So it sounds like your workaround is to refer them to the Kitsap Builders Association. Is that right, Mr. Jackson?
If there's questions about zoning, those should be directed to us. Like how many units
Okay.
you can fit, that type of thing. If you're looking to actual, like, will it pencil, technical questions for an engineer, anything like that, that would be the Kitsap Building Association.
Got it. Thank you so much. I wanted to I appreciated a couple of comments. We have Kathy Bradley, and we also had Mike. I just have Mike written down, where they were worried about the parking requirements and where the cars were going to go. And I do agree that creating higher density on these lots will push cars further into the streets. Now, there are areas where we know that we have parking issues, and we don't have a workaround for that yet. As we know, we've had parking issues since time immemorial of the city. But I do think that's something that as we work the comprehensive plan, as we start to get into that we think about those additional parking issues that could come. But I don't personally see a giant boom in these types of developments. What this issue really reminds me of, and I'm not sure who's seen it, but the KUOW article about war boxes. I don't know if anybody saw that or not. But this sort of reminds me of that we're creating, we have a huge need for housing. And so we're in a sense in a war, right? We have tons of homeless. We have an epidemic out there of homelessness, substance use disorder, mental wellness issues, all kinds of things that are going on. And we need war boxes in our communities. And I can definitely respect what Councilmember Younger is talking about the missing middle class. I'm an older millennial, proud, born in 1979, and I've never been in a situation, in a position to be able to own my own home. And I even tried recently, and this market was crazy. And so there weren't a lot of options for me. And I did want to ask quickly, there was a comment from the public about rent stabilization, which I think, and Ms. Fennell, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's actually legislature that kind of like I think it's frowned upon in our state. We don't have rent control in Washington state. Am I wrong?
We don't. It's preempted.
Okay, so we can't do rent stabilization, rent control. There's no options for that. And so then we have several council members that believe that if we have more housing, that we will in fact have lower rents, that more housing, that we're not, but I don't personally believe that. I would love if one of you council members who believes that more housing equals lower rents, can you send me a study where that's actually worked in the community? Because I've been out there looking for these studies and I haven't found one. I do believe that more housing is better, that it provides more opportunities for folks to get a home. But what I just don't believe that it'll lower rents. Rents are going to keep going up. But that's neither here nor there. We need housing. I want to address really briefly, as briefly as I can, the issues regarding homelessness and tie that into a conversation real quick, not even a conversation, just a statement about the religious exemption, which is state mandated. We can't get around that. But what I really appreciate that the city has done, that the administration has done, is to put some boundaries on how the religious organizations can apply for this bonus density. So I appreciate that the city had the forethought to put some restrictions, boundaries in place in order to try to mitigate that. I am hopeful, even though I'm not part of a faith-based community, I am hopeful that religious organizations and BHA will take advantage of these programs in order to increase housing for folks that are in need. That's why I'm a huge supporter of this. And that's all I really have to say about that. I tried to make it brief. I get to be chair today, so I guess that means I get last word. I did want to ask really quickly, Mr. Jackson, a statement you made early on in your presentation. It says, you said, in part, BHA supports these amendments. Was it amendments or the criteria? And I wanted to know what you meant by in part, and if the BHA has any reservations about the code as presented.
No, it was the bonus density was extended specifically to BHA, and that's what we engaged with them on primarily, and that's what their letter was in support on. So that's why I said in part, because it was specific to the bonus density, because they're included in it.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. And so the BHA has a stellar record. They're really great at not only getting the data, but getting the grants and facilitating that. And I think we do need more affordable housing for folks to be able to use vouchers on. And I want to echo the community members' concerns that this is going to be like a luxury. You know, I am concerned about that, but I don't see this zone change being a huge boom in housing. And I do hope that it provides more options for folks of all different economic levels. Okay, so seeing no further discussion, I call for the question. And Ms. Hoover, you are back. So I'm sure Ms. Smith is very happy to turn it back over to you. Not that she's wasn't very capable and happy to take over.
No problem. Thank you for your patience. Do you hear me okay? Perfect. Councilmember Fry,
Yes.
Coughlin,
Yes.
Dennehy,
Yes.
Mochler,
Yes.
Younger,
No.
Chamberlain.
Yes.
Motion carries